needed to contact our facilities. Next, please. With Sunny's help, 'cause she's the master. I can do alert and messaging, but I don't do them often anymore. So we've had Sunny come and help us in many ways because we do alerts often. It just depends which program it's affecting. So, during the crab season, we can have crab alerts and shellfish alerts. But we have the Gov delivery system where we can quickly, with a few push of the button, really.
Yeah.
Again, same query. It's like, okay, I want to contact bakeries, you just click, and it sends the messaging out to our licensees. So we're able to in in emergencies, we can send our alerts this way, which is pretty effective if, we have power and internet, that kind of stuff. Next, please. We also have, we have a new website and different web pages, and first thing that people would see on our general web page is just alerts or information that's important for people to see right away. So in this case, it goes from, it's not the only alert, but or important messaging. So I just wanted to do this one here because it is, we're getting in that season again with the migratory birds and whatnot, where a lot of people, first thing they want to come and see is going to our HPI page, where they can get all the information that our state vet tracks and puts there that is relevant to the public. Next. So this is just to visit our webpage. And before we get into the questions part, a little bit more about, so when I come in and be part of the exercise, we try to bring other people in. So now that Sunny's with us, I'm hoping she will join us to as a senior policy advisor. I think it's just amazing to have Sunny be part of that exercise to see more. We have two staff. If we go by what we do for our exercise, we have two staff that are near here that have been the ones that go out and collect samples. We can certainly pull more staff from other places, but the reason why I went into the whole, this is ODA, this is food safety, 13,500 licenses and only, 40 some people in the field, is that the challenge is always like, well, we have an exercise here. And now we need to pull 2 people or 3 people from going out and doing these inspections for an exercise, which is very important. So we've been able to do that, but the challenge is always with having lack of resources, or people are on vacation. I notified our team last time we had our exercise that one of the person on our staff who was heavily involved with the emergency exercises passed away suddenly, just a young guy passed away. So we will need to replace that, what Jeff was doing with, someone new, they can be able to come in and be part of the exercise. We're committed to it. But we're hoping that with Sunny being with us here and involved in the future of exercises, you will get a little bit more access to where we can show up with our our public information officer or communication managers, if you wish, or maybe even as the exercise evolves, is to bring someone from a different program to start thinking about, well, what if it's gonna affect, produce that's, during the produce growing season, for instance. So we're super excited to be part of the exercising, and we're hoping that now we're getting an extra boost by, bringing new people on board and helping out with what we do. So, and then the next slide is just
real quick.
questions.
Around licensing, I think what comes up for me from a lot of folks is, do you license everybody? And we don't license every farmer. You do not have to have a license to be a farmer, right?
Okay.
So, but we do have the confined animal feed operation or CAFO licenses. We have scales. So every scale in the state has to be licensed by our weights and measures program.
Every gas pump.
Every gas pump. so that's something that folks don't necessarily think about agriculture.
Right.
But if you think back to when we were selling stuff, we started out with scales selling agricultural commodities, right? So we have some of that in some other places. Pesticides, if you're commercially applying pesticides or you're applying restricted use, like higher risk pesticides, you would have to have a license, Mark.
I just, for a little more context, because it's their authority as an ingestion state that would put a quarantine into Umatilla, Morrow County. But can you speak to what the board probably doesn't know, even though we're sitting in Boardman, the amount of production that's going on here, right here, and what's around us? You mentioned a mega dairy, and I have Sage and Jim can also attest to this. How big that dairy is over there? How much production's going on here? Because when we plan for potential for a Hanford incident with impact to Oregon, the amount of stuff that would get shut down if under their authority to say food production stopping, trucks aren't coming in from the state of Washington, all that is a bigger deal. But if you could just speak to where we're sitting right here and what's going on around us would be great and helpful.
Sure. Briefly, so on the dairy side, we have those mega dairy. We have a new one coming on board, making them technically 5, but always 4 in production, while one of them is being upgraded, updated, and what's so not. A few years ago, it was about 1 million pounds a day that's going into Columbia River processing for making cheese. And then from that cheese, it goes to the Columbia River technologies to make whey and different kinds of whey, depending on the customers. We have onion processors, French fry makers, Lamb Weston, few plants over here. We have packing sheds, onions, potatoes, blueberries. So, and on and on and on and on and on, feed.
Yeah.
This, as was mentioned earlier about how we can't keep up with housing for how big things are growing and whatnot. It truly encapsulates how, on the ag side, I know there's also data centers and whatnot coming up there, how big and these facilities are. So anything we do in the valley here seems to be like, they got a magnifying gun and blew them up. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, just statistically and just being from here, I mean, most of all your crisp cut curly fries, anything like that you get at Arby's or anything is produced right here and in Hermiston, Lamb Weston. And then Tillamook cheese, I think is like over, I don't want to say this wrong, like, is it 90% of Tillamook cheese is made right here?
Yeah, I think so.
Could one of you, could you maybe speak about, you say ingestion, what does that mean for Umatilla County versus if it happened in a county?
Within radiological emergency preparedness for fixed nuclear facilities, which includes Hanford, you have 2 zones. You have what's called a plume zone because the area within 10 miles of Hanford site, to use that as an example, is within it where certain constituents are going to fall out. Let's say that's cesium, and it's going to stay close, so it's going to stay within a 10-mile. Oregon's more concerned about iodine 131, although Hanford's got a lot of different other things that could go water, air. On the water side, does anybody know which one of the communities along here is drinking out of the Columbia River?
Boardman. This one is.
Oregon and Boardman. So that's an important factor when we talk about the reason that.
Not directly.
But I mean, but the thing that we do as an ingestion state, which is within the 50, is we're worried about the pathway is human consumption through food. So if you had an incident, let's say a major catastrophe at the tank farms, you get a plume out of that, the wind's blowing south. When we're mobilizing coming in, let's say if it's this time of year, we're coming to Carl and Sonny saying, what's growing, and going to Sage and Steve and saying, what's in production right now? Because they immediately, under their statutory authority, got to do stop X and say, stop production. The dairies, correct me if I'm wrong, but this dairy down here has a carousel that takes 80 cows at a time, correct?
some of them, and the new one, 120 some.
So that's that many stepping on to get milk with the other ones waiting right behind them. So that's talking about, so during an exercise, what they send their staff to do along with staff from Oregon Health Authority that are doing the environmental sampling, the air, the ground, the vegetation, all that, to confirm if we've got anything, is they're going to those dairies and pulling milk sample, because the first thing those dairies, they don't want to stop production. But if they've got several thousand gallons that just came in, and we think that there's deposition on the ground that we're looking for, cows in the field as an ingestion state, because that's the pathway to human health, is we say, under your authority, you got to tell them, we're not culling herds. Washington State goes through the process of culling herds because of the 10 mile. We go through, feed them, put them on stored grain, move them. How long is it gonna take you to move them? And the milk thing they always ask is, this batch was made during this time frame. This one's now, and it's their authority that says you can produce that. But going back to that perception thing, nuclear disaster in Oregon and Washington, who the hell's gonna touch our ice cream or anything else if they think it's contaminated? So we rely on them heavily and their authorities to say, what do we do and how we tell the public, because perception's reality. They're gonna come out and say, don't eat an apple, don't drink the wine, don't touch an onion. They say, but that's Northeast. No, so that's gonna affect the whole state.
Maybe if I just, the two things, one, the actual lab for the sampling of radiological constituents is at Oregon State University. So there's a time lab, we have to move samples from here to Corvallis. A couple ways we might do that. One is which, National Guard, civilian.
We would use the Civil Air
Working?
Patrol,
Civil Air
or,
Patrol.
yeah, but we
Help us
would do the
move the
guard
sample.
first to move it to say, there's something here, there's something isn't. And it includes, their folks will go out with health to also grab anything else. The last exercise, and Sage can attest to this, because he brought it up, when FEMA was evaluating, said, what else is going on out there? And Sage is like, it's deer season, it's elk season. Right.
Yeah.
You
100%.
can't, and it was like, and it was good, and FEMA was like, we didn't even think about
Get it,
that.
yeah.
So
Rebels
it's
in the
already up
spring.
in to say,
Maybe I'll just say one more thing, we're going to Esteban and see Rep. Lee's on there too, is this type of a decision, we practice it a couple times a year, as Mark described. But the decision would be so consequential that we would be in contact with perhaps the governor herself.
Yep.
And it would be the director of agriculture, the director of our agency, and the governor. Who would probably make that final decision on recommendation from us to make that choice.
It would be
It's such a consequential.
it'd be a disaster declaration related to food stuff, but consequentially, because you go to the store, I always tell people, you go to the store, you grab a gallon of milk, does it say where that cow was?
And you trust it to be safe.
Yep, so that's on, so when we talk about the number of staff that they have, I mean, we can't thank them enough for everything that they do, because you don't think about it. Even like holiday season, you get crab, they're making sure that that crab's safe to go into the food chain.
Maybe you'll call on Rep. Levy, you have a question here, is your hand raised? Her name is Esteban.
Not a question, a comment. Oregon is one of the largest food producers in the United States for all over the world. And we export food more than we keep it here. And also Farmers Ending Hunger specifically grows food for all the food banks in Oregon. And we set aside certain acreage for just the food banks. And so it's a big deal to make sure you notify all the farmers. And we're now doing aquifer recharge out of the Columbia River and recharging our aquifer system because we have critical groundwater area. I just didn't know how much everybody knew.
Yeah,
you for
thank
that.
you for that. That's really important context too. I appreciate that. Esteban?
I visited the dairy, because I guess United Farm Workers have the contract with them, I can't remember, but my big question, I'm glad, and because you said policy, and I think this is for Oregon, because I'm still trying to learn the policy of Oregon. And I know Ryan's here, but the big thing, like the HEAL Act, right? It was all the multiple state agencies. But when it comes to like policy work, like this work, and then the whole funding process, what has Oregon done, especially to make sure there's a funding, especially for the rural communities, or is there anything that's happening?
We don't get additional funding for any emergency management activity.
It's a statute, it's a statutory requirement. We get We get some for our the programs from like the utility and things and pass-through funding, but if the statute says you're the lead agency for this, then it goes within our budgets, but we also try, it's like DOE provides funding for our oversight for Hanford and emergency preparedness.
So he touched on something, what is the mechanism for farm workers?
Yeah.
Particularly, seasonal people. They've been hired to go pick pears in Hood River. Well, is there a mechanism that says their employer must pull them out of the field or do?
We would lean heavily on the counties to know what's going on at the ground to say what's going on at this point in time to protect the public, including them, because we, through Oregon Health Authority, would have to put out recommendations for health and safety related to any radiological incident. A PAD or a PAR, protective action decision or a protective action recommendation, but it would include that, but we would rely on our counterparts at the county level to say what's going on and how do we reach out? Because you're right, we don't know, but he would know.
So first, and I don't have all the experience with nuclear and everything that a lot of you guys do, but being an ingestion state, we'd be more hesitant to just move those workers because unless they're really consuming it, unless it's something a lot bigger like a plume coming over, we wouldn't necessarily, and when I say we, I don't want to say like this is our decision. We wouldn't necessarily be more worried about people having the fallout onto them, more of the consumption. And so we wouldn't necessarily be worried about workers or personnel, and that's the public messaging, and we talk about that. We wouldn't necessarily be worried about me going outside and I'm out in, the orchard and it's gonna fall on me and then I'm gonna be exposed. It's more of
The workers in Washington state that were within that 10 mile, the state of Washington would be engaging them because they do move people and shelter in place. We don't do that.
Yeah, we would more necessarily be putting out, we have a messaging system what each county does, just a public alert about that. We're more worried about farmers markets, hobby farmers, different people, what they're touching as well, and that going into the food supply and people consuming that across the county, across the state. Because the other thing that, and I know we're short on time here, to think about is that if there is an incident, it's not just they're saying you regulate, but you don't regulate everybody. And so that's kind of where we come into place. Are you bringing down these tomatoes down to the farmer's market you just picked?
Out of your garden
Or
that you're selling on the.
Fresh goat milk or
cantaloupe.
Or anything. And so it gets pretty crazy when you start getting into the rabbit hole of
I
it.
would think OSHA would have a role to play with farm worker protection as well.
Yeah.
They would regulate that to a certain extent if there
Based on the
was.
risk profile from the state, we would not, to the point, we would not evacuate Oregonians from a nuclear disaster. We would not expect to have to evacuate Oregonians or shelter in place from a disaster at the Hanford facility. It's just too far. So the risk profile becomes different as we're describing here.
So I'm starting to see a few defections from the room. Sarah, you're on deck for 5 o'clock, so I would propose we take a break between now and 5 o'clock, but because it's been a while. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
I'll be around, sending me around, so.
Yeah, I had a dinner with us.
You come to dinner, stay the night?
You're gonna hit a few sites to inspect on your way home?
No, we should do. One meeting for the next.
Sorry,
Yeah.
You need-
I said to my wife,
No, I said on.
It's a great agency. I wouldn't be there for 9 years.
I guess I got totally.
So you can just down.
And you don't think of that.
You'll have to call.
I mean, I could just go to the store, you get your milk, you get your.
it's an hour.
You don't realize all of this.
Yeah, so it's an hour late.
That's not.
Then that, okay, yeah.
It's.
Did you have staff in all the packing shed?
Oh, wow.
Well, that's what worries me about that, is what waterways are we using? And
Okay, let's get back together. Are we online?
We are, I believe we are.
Okay.
I'm actually.
And we can hear you.
Oh, Stephen, good to hear your voice.
Right back at
So-
you.
I'm Sarah Lepting and I work with Oregon Department of Energy. Doing like 5% of what I do is Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board related work and the emergency preparedness work. 95% of what I do is natural resource damage assessment at Hanford site. And I have the help of Tom Cecilia, who is my so I'm considered the primary trustee, in representing Oregon on the Hanford Trustee Council. Tom is my alternate, so he goes to meetings in case I can't get to a meeting. And I direct him in on, groundwater issues. And then, Max also does a little bit of work on the natural resource damage assessment as the senior trustee. As a senior trustee, really, his role becomes really important at the very end of the natural resource damage assessment, because you get to sign all the really big, scary legal paperwork. And I just get to make all of the decisions about which studies and funding to, and what to fund.
It's not scary when we have someone as great as Sarah on our team. So this program is, I must say, you're such an asset to our team and the state. You know, people realize how important this work is.
So I'm gonna start out with just a brief explanation of what a natural resource damage assessment is. I'll go into a little bit of back history about the trustee council. And then I'm gonna give a brief update on what the trustee council is working on now. And hopefully we'll have time for a little bit of question. So a natural resource damage claim is brought by governments. I represent Oregon, so the state of Oregon has natural resources that are being affected by Hanford site, and that would be the Columbia River, because 50 miles of the Columbia River run through the Hanford site. And there are other governments involved. I'll list them in a moment. So these natural resource damage claims are brought by governments on behalf of their public. I'm representing the Oregon public on this trustee council, and raising concerns about the Columbia River. We, as a trustee council, have decided to follow the regulations in CERCLA. We could have chosen a couple of different authorities. Natural resource damage assessment is defined and well outlined in the CERCLA regulations, but it's also defined in Oil Pollution Act and the Clean Water Act. Many states, including Oregon, have their own regulations around NRDA. So there are a couple of different ways you can approach a natural resource damage assessment. The CERCLA guidelines have a trustee council determine the injury to natural resources from exposure to contaminants, from the physical damage like bulldozers that are doing the cleanup, and from the time of the release. But in the case of Hanford, because it's so old, it's really from the time of when CERCLA started. So that would be basically beginning of 1981. And then until those ecosystem services are restored. So that means that if we decide to do a restoration project to restore these ecosystem services, we continue to count that injury until the shrubs mature, until the habitat is replaced. So it can go into the future as well. So I get often I get a question about what's the difference between remediation and the cleanup side of CERCLA and the restoration, the NRDA side. So the cleanup is really there to eliminate and control the risks to human health and the environment.
Whereas the natural resource damage assessment and restoration, we are really focused on restoration of those injured natural resources, right? To the baseline condition. And that baseline condition just means, let's imagine a world where Hanford did all the things that Hanford set out to do, make plutonium, but didn't spill anything, right? So we're gonna, that would be the baseline. So we want to restore the Hanford site as if nothing was spilled. So both of the cleanup side and the restoration side, they both go through this sort of preliminary assessment. That's what kind of data we have, what information do we have to work with. They go through this planning stage where we, the natural resource damage assessment side will study, we'll develop studies, plan studies that help us define better what injury is there, and the cleanup side does the same. And then in the very end, both sides end up with sort of a plan. The remedial design, remedial action plan ensures that there's no unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. Whereas the RCDP on the restoration side focuses on returning those ecosystem services to pre-release conditions. So there are similarities there. We often use the same data, like we'll go into the remediation side and use their data, but we're also going to design our own studies. Those roughly the steps that a natural resource damage assessment would take. And the words that sort of march across the top of each one of these boxes is from CERCLA, and the words that are on the sides that go vertically are from the Oil Pollution Act, but they kind of use different words to describe sort of similar things. So we start out by defining where is that release? What's the source of the contamination? And then we'd ask, like, how is that contamination migrating? What are the pathways for that contamination? We would identify which natural resources are affected, what are the receptors, and we quantify the exposure to those different receptors. We would define the risk and the injury to those different natural resources, the plants, animals, and we would come up with a dose estimate. And then we would define the restoration project that would uplift that natural resource to those pre-release conditions. And that restoration, in this case, defines the monetary damages that Department of Energy owes the public. So we don't try to put a dollar amount on, you know, what's the value of a pygmy rabbit. We were not going to come up with a dollar amount for a population of pygmy rabbits. What we would say is this population of pygmy rabbits has been decimated. What will it cost to bring them back? And that cost is the monetary damages that DOE owes to the public. So the actual NERDA that's happening at Hanford site includes 8 trustees. There are 2 states, Oregon and Washington. 3 tribes, Confederated tribes of the Umatilla, the Nez Perce tribe, and the Yakama Nation. And then 3 federal agencies. So there's the responsible party, which is DOE, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Both have staff that work full-time on natural resource damage assessment across the United States. They are pulled in to help us go through all the steps because their staff does this full-time all the time throughout the United States. Usually as a federal trustee submitting a claim to industry. In this case, they're the defendant, they're the responsible party. But in this case, they are still guiding the trustee council because they have so much experience and are very important partners in the trustee council. So there's actually like the natural resource damage assessment hasn't really been going on since 1993, but in 1993, DOE invited all of the trustee organizations and created the Hanford Natural Resource Trustee Council. At that point, though, it was really an advisory board. It was not a true natural resource damage assessment. And back in 1993, DOE sort of controlled the agenda, invited the people and said, you know, let's incorporate some considerations for the environment as we do the cleanup. But in around the 2000s and then completing in 2007, the trustee council decided, let's do a real nerd here. Like the trustee council needs to steer this, not the responsible party, right? Like that's just weird. So in 2007, they completed, the two different trustees actually completed a pre-assessment screen. The Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla was one of them. And then the trustee council decided that we should proceed with a formal NERDA. And in around that time, the Yakama Nation sued the federal government. And I won't go into the details of that, but all of the non-federal trustees, the two tribes, the three state, or the two states, the three tribes, went in on one of the claims, and that claim said that the United States Department of Energy should pay for the natural resource damage assessment upfront. DOE agreed to this in the settlement agreement, so the natural resource damage assessment, my position, gets funded by the Department of Energy upfront. And that's unusual in a natural resource damage assessment. Usually, the responsible party pays for both the restoration and the cost of the assessment at the very end of a natural resource damage assessment. In this case, DOE is paying for all the cost of the assessment up front and really will only have to pay for the restoration at the end. So they're not going to get quite as large a bill at the end, which is, you know, if we had any DOE people on the call, I doubt we do. I wish they knew that, because that sometimes is a point of contention. So, and then in 2013, the trustee council developed what's called an injury assessment plan that is publicly available. And it goes through like all of the different studies that we could do, not that we're going to do all of them. And then in 2016, I came on board. So I came on board at a good time when we were like fully in the middle of the injury assessment. The trustee council divides the work into like 4 different buckets. The groundwater work is furthest along, and that's the one I'm gonna talk about a little bit more. So in all of the buckets, we've sort of defined what the source and pathway is. We've defined, and for groundwater, we've identified the injuries. The contaminated groundwater. There are these big groundwater plumes that PNNL has well defined on maps. And we've even, in the case of groundwater, we've quantified how much of that groundwater is not potable, cannot be used by the public. So that's a natural resource that the public will no longer be able to use. And that's, you know, now DOE must compensate the public for that lost natural resource, right? At this point, we have a minimum range of what that injury is. I believe it's gonna probably grow a little bit. And at this point, we are actively soliciting ideas for groundwater restoration projects. And that's what I'm talking to you about a little bit. And we are
Are we
developing.
talking millions or billions?
I'm gonna get into that in a second.
Okay.
Next slide. So, we are, and then we're also developing these ranking criteria. So we're gonna collect all of these project ideas, and then we're gonna apply these ranking criteria to all of the projects that may come up. and then begin to prioritize which projects we'll select using those ranking criteria. That's what we are actively doing right now. The aquatic and terrestrial working groups are not quite as far along. We are very much in the identifying the injury stage. I would say that the aquatic work is further along. The terrestrial just has a lot more territory to cover. The tribal service loss studies are done individually by each of the tribes. And not even I know really where they are. I kind of get off the cuff, like, we're coming along, but I don't ever get to see those reports. And they won't be publicly available because some of that is culturally sensitive. So the groundwater claim, these are the down and dirty details, and this is also pretty high level. I could really get into the weeds with you if you want later. So the total aquifer at Hanford site is going to be 2.8 million acre feet. In 2014, different plume maps were developed, and we decided to use the 2014 values just because we have to use some number. So there are 445,000 acre feet of contaminated water in the aquifer. 17% of that contaminated aquifer is actually above drinking water thresholds, and so and will be in perpetuity. So we're saying, nobody is going to be able to drink that water forever. Like, basically, it's thousands of years, so it's virtual forever. So that ends up being, if you calculate that out, about 618,000 acre feet per year is now no longer available to the public for use. That is what DOE now owes to the public. And so that's the minimum range, that 6 to 18,000 acre feet per year. The future impacts from, say, leaking tanks or contamination left, like that small percentage, the 2 to 5% of the contamination left in the bottom of the tanks that are going to be grouted in place, maybe. That may also eventually work its way into the Veda zone and eventually into the groundwater. So we would actually make assumptions. We're not going to know exactly how much that might be in the future, but the trustee council would account for that by making these assumptions. If DOE pushed back on those assumptions, we would say, okay, let's do a study then, and you'd have to pay for that study, responsible party. And so, and that gives us a little bit of leverage then to, so DOE would maybe be more amenable to talking about assumptions rather than paying for another study. So, that's kind of groundwater. The things that we're doing today actively is that groundwater restoration planning. And if you have groundwater, and it would have to be groundwater recharge kind of projects, groundwater restoration projects. If you have a favorite project, let me know. I would love to hear about them. Like I said, we are actively now soliciting ideas for that. Tom and I together are sort of doing the research on that. And at the same time, the full trustee council is working on these ranking criteria, which we will apply to all of the projects that all of the trustees bring to the table. We are also determining the areas in the river in the Hanford Reach that are affected by contaminated groundwater that is upwelling into the river. So we're looking at the benthos of the river and how the animal, like mostly fish and invertebrates that live in the bottom of the river, how they are affected. So there's a workshop and a study going on there. We're also at this point doing an inventory of the actual physical injury to the river caused by cleanup. And inventory of physical injury was was completed a few years ago, like I want to say 2018, for the terrestrial habitats. But now, right now, we're working on the river. And then we're also working on opportunities for early restoration in the shrub steppe habitat, as well as developing tissue thresholds for the different receptors, so plants, animals. We already have these thresholds that have been developed for the media, so water, sediment, and soil. Thresholds have been developed, but now we're working on tissue thresholds for biota. So, and we've done other things in the past. You can talk to me later if you're really interested, but this is what we're actively doing right now. And I was gonna close with this idea that that the natural resource damage assessment is really complicated for a lot of different reasons. Not least of which is that Hanford is a huge site. It's really large. A single nuclear reactor would be plenty for a natural resource trustee council to wrap their hands around, but we have 9 nuclear reactors and the whole 200 area. We have all of those tanks, the plutonium finishing plant, all of those facilities, those crimson trenches, the ponds, all of it it's a lot of work for a single group to get their hands around. And a lot of that work depends on data that comes from the responsible party. And contractors often own those data, DOE does not, so we have to work hard to get those data sometimes. We have the trustee council, 8 of us have to agree on different legal and technical assumptions. We have to estimate injury since 1981, or the end of 1980, using really old data. And sometimes those data were collected using methods that are very old. So we're using old data and data that's hard to gather. We are also estimating what Hanford looks like, but for the release. And there are differing opinions there, depending on if you ask the responsible party, DOE, or the non-federal trustees. And also recovery time to the baseline state. So how quickly would a habitat recover? Again, we're gonna have differing opinions and we're gonna have to negotiate that. And then finally, well, not finally, but simplifying all of this complicated, like boiling down the toxicology, the ecology, the economy, like just figuring out that how much things are going to cost. All of this has to be boiled down to something that is simple enough for a judge, if it goes to court, for a judge to assess quickly and easily. So we have a lot of work in trying to simplify all of these complicated concepts. And then always building trust and maintaining that trust with our responsible party and among other trustees as well. So it's a lot of work. That's all I've done. I managed to get that in.
Sarah, can you speak to the work you do with Oregon Department of Justice and how DOJ is involved?
Yeah, I work closely with an attorney from Oregon Department of Justice. So, like I said, there are a lot of, I've worked closely with the toxicologists at OSU, with the legal issues and policy issues, with the attorney at DOJ. And there are these legal interpretations, so not least of which is DOE at certain points has made noises about how they own the groundwater, and so there's no injury there because no one's gonna drink it. They own it. They're not gonna release it. They're not, and so we have all of the trustees have our own attorneys who are working on those legal questions. Who does own the groundwater? The state of Washington says they do, and the tribes who have ceded lands there say they also do. And I could get into the weeds on that too, but that's just an example of a legal question where you would want an attorney by your side.
Clever attorney.
I assume they're claiming Federal Reserve rights.
Nate, when you talk about projects or the scope of this and being from, does that include, or is that for Hanford, the site and the tribes that have trusted land? What's the scope when you're talking about developing these projects? Like, is that the whole state of Oregon? What does that look like?
Oh, the restoration project will come out.
Well, the restoration projects and the money, what does that look like in terms of remediating some of these effects? Is that just specific to the Hanford site? Or does that,
Not necessarily. And in the case of groundwater, no. In the case of groundwater, that groundwater is contaminated. They have pump and treat stations that are treating it. But we're saying there's a certain amount of that where you're just not gonna, it's always gonna be there. It's always gonna be a problem. You're not gonna get that back, no matter how much you pump and treat. So that restoration project really can't happen at Hanford site. It's going to probably happen, much of it's probably gonna happen in Washington, but it could happen in Oregon as well.
Is that the big dig?
I think it is.
Yeah. That's the top of, that was,
Chromium.
Yeah, that's
chromium, that's chromium,
That's chromium, that's the
Yeah.
chromium, yeah.
that's the top of a
Yeah.
on the site. And that was called the big
That's
dig.
That's DDR, I think, yeah?
That's DDR or seventy, yeah, could be.
Was it left like that?
So just to give, well, the context when they're doing cleanup,
Yeah,
that's moving everything back to get to the top of it.
yeah.
So that's what it actually looks
You can
like,
see the
because
green.
when they were given tours, we were able to go there and see the top of it, but that's the top of it.
Yeah.
That's a
So
plumb.
they remediated contaminated soil down to groundwater and they couldn't dig much deeper than that. So the groundwater had some residual source in it and that's that color in the picture. That's hexavalent chromium.
But that's the same thing that Aaron Brockovich was facing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Hanford.
It's a good reminder that it's not just radiological,
Yeah.
it's got the same. Chemicals.
And there's a cocoon reactor, there's two cocoon reactors, so just as you're learning about Hanford, but it's like, yeah. Proximity, because that was in use for treating the water that was going in the reactors, and it's like
Yeah.
dumping in.
Okay.
And the city council actually has a website. That is not the right address. Oh my God, that's the old website. Anyway, we do have a
I
website.
had a quick question, and maybe, you indicated that you were working with 3 tribes, but the Confederated Tribes is themselves 3 tribes, and the Yakama Nation is almost 14.
Yes, so it's
So
the three,
it's the representatives of the tribes.
Yeah.
And secondly, some of this, I mean, when you try and restore the landscape to what it looked like pre-everything, right? I mean, we know there's sites out, I mean.
it's not pre-everything. It's just, so we're going to imagine a world where there were no spills. So plutonium was produced and all of those facilities, the footprint of, say, the plutonium finishing plant is not going to be part of the NERDA, but all of the land that was disturbed and cleaning that up.
I got you. So it's just relative to the stills and what I'm thinking like Hertup, right? I mean, you might be able to get the surface to look like it did in the past, but at some point in time, well, we know what's under there, where the reactors are from the subs and these kind of things.
Um,
We think we know.
that's a legal question.
What about, what about?
Lawyer.
Don't worry, I'm here.
Yeah, I think it's time to move to the next, agenda item, which is board business.
Thank you, sir. That was very well.
Yes.
Enormous job.
Yes, Sarah, thank you. There are two kind of emerging topics that we wanted to introduce the board to. Not get into detailed discussions. That's something that will happen in future meetings, but Mike has volunteered to give us 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
The radiation is.
Apparently he's heard me speak before. Can you pull up my slides?
Yeah.
We gotta unmute.
There we go. We're on now.
We're good.
Okay,
We'll mute.
good. Winding back. Again. 6 or 7 presidential orders advancing the opportunities for nuclear power. One in particular applies to us, and that's this one. Calling for the reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's approach to protection from radiation. Next slide, please. There was a meeting held in July where the ideas for how radiation protection regulations might be changed were floated. The primary document expressing, I guess, the new look at these numbers was brought forth by folks from the Idaho National Laboratory, and they are indeed the experts on development and application of nuclear reactor technology. The next slide. Before we can really get into it, there's this term, which is, as was pointed out, is really subject to interpretation, and that is the idea that people should be protected from radiation as low as reasonably achievable. What is reasonable? In the discussion earlier, the folks from Hanford touched on that. Is $1 billion to knock 10 millirem off the exposure? Is that reasonable? That's an issue. Still, that is what is written into the regulations today. Next slide. This is a very dense slide, and I don't think we need to go too deeply into it. The key features are there are 3 regulatory agencies which are invested in setting standards and enforcing them. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission itself, the Department of Energy, and the EPA. For workers, it's the top two that set the limits, and that gets translated back down into OSHA. EPA says, we're environment people, we'll let you deal with the workers. Currently, regulation says 5,000 milligrams per year per worker is the maximum. But you will provide protection to a LARA standard. What was in the Idaho document is a recommendation that we do much less than LARA and just say, if it's under 5,000, that's okay. Recognizing though that that's going to build up on people and a cumulative effect. They said, well, there's going to be some appropriate limit that should be enforced for 5-year total exposure. It didn't go into much detail on that. However, based on their understanding of the science and their interpretation of the many, many hundreds of studies, they believe that these limits are actually too low and that the limit ought to be raised to 10,000 milligram per year for workers, and that the public should be raised from 100 milligram for NRC sites to 500 milligram at NRC sites. And that the EPA should adopt, as a first pass, these similar kinds of limits. Instead of doing a risk assessment, saying, well, if you're exposed to this much, there's a 1 in a million chance you're going to get cancer. Don't do that risk assessment, just set some hard numbers. For example, raising drinking water limits from 4 milligram per exposure to 20, and that way you don't, it's not so complicated to deal with these regulations. This proposal is very complex, and making these kinds of decisions, which have been actively argued about since 1999, is going to be a real challenge. And next slide. They have real impact on us. Those shipping containers we talked about. If you change all those exposure limits, surely that's going to affect what the DOT is going to require. If those containers that now have 5 to 7 milligram on the outside have to may meet a higher standard, well, maybe that'll be 20 or 30 on the outside. Maybe it'll be 100. Again, no need to get into it now, but just to highlight some of the things that could potentially affect us. Next slide, please. There is a great push to accomplish many things in a short period of time. The July meeting set the stage for promulgating new regulations, rewriting the federal regulations that cover these exposures. They want to get a preliminary, they want to collect comments in the January timeframe. They want to promulgate a offering of what regulations could be, and they want to finalize those a year from now. A year from now sounds like a long time. Given the complexity of all of this stuff, I don't think we will. So I raised the issue. You're going to get this first taste, and I'm sure that will come up again. With that, then I return.
So
Chairman.
what we had talked about was this is an emerging issue and that would be of interest to the board and that the board should consider asking Odo to come back to us at our next meeting or perhaps the spring meeting with recommendations on what an analysis and recommendations on what position, if any, the state of Oregon should take on these new standards. So discussion.
The good news is we're already on it. Some, the Oregon Health Authority, or so the way the structure works, Oregon Health Authority has a division called Radiation Protection Services, or RPS. We work closely with them on a host of issues, and the NRC rulemaking, we have already begun direct conversations with OHA about what the state of Oregon's position on this could or should be, all the way to the effect where OHA, we provided some input on a comment letter that OHA put together to the NRC about a month ago, just to make sure that the federal government understood the risks and the concerns that state of Oregon had before this rulemaking really even kicked off in effect. So I admit we hadn't quite made the connection yet to Hanford cleanup standards. So I appreciate, Mike, you bringing this up for our attention here. People know we also handle radioactive waste disposal issues in the state, aside from Hanford. So the context for us is sort of multifold, both state regulation, state safety, as well as our role of the Hanford cleanup recommendation. So we're going to make sure we stay in touch with Health Authority and then get back together with this board with concepts as soon as we can. And Tom, you get something to add to that, by the way, because you were closely involved with Health Authority on the process there.
Yeah, so just this would only really apply to a very limited number of cleanups at the Hanford site because the vast majority of cleanup is done for chemical materials. But once NRC finalizes their numbers, then EPA would have to pick it up. And so it would be, NRC's numbers might be done by 2026, but EPA's would take another year or two after that. So there's some time.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mike. So the bottom line here for the board is stay tuned. We will get another update from Odo in probably in our next meeting. The other kind of emerging issue, if I can pull up my notes here, which we already addressed to some degree with U.S. Department of Energy, was the competition for true waste capacity at WIP. And the concern there was these new commercial contracts that are being awarded to recycle weapons grade plutonium into for use in power reactors could generate a considerable amount of true waste. So again, that's just at this point for awareness, and I'm sure Tom Cecilia, you will be looking at that issue, correct?
Absolutely. At the same time that the commercial plants are going to be reprocessing spent nuclear fuel, you also have material that was going to WIP, which is the surplus plutonium from Savannah River site that might also get reworked into fuel as well. So there might be a balancing effect between the downblended plutonium that was going to go there versus the newly generated plutonium. So yes, we're watching that as well.
Okay, thank you. Mark, we were going to remind the board about their obligations for workday training.
Yes, and thank you for teeing it up that way. Just as a reminder, is coming from the board administrator's desk. By appointment, you are officially state officials. So just like with state employees, check log into Workday regularly, check to see if you have any required training that you need to complete. There are updates to state policies that have to be done annually, and there's always changes to state policies. As an example, the AI policy is evolving. And I say evolving because there's a lot going on with that, and whether as state official, you can create any documents using AI. At our agency, just on the AI discussion, we have some internal things going on because we have to remind our own folks that it takes more energy to create anything in AI than it does to do a Google search. So just for the awareness, I get the reports as the board administrator if someone hasn't done their completed regular training. So please help me by going in regular and checking it. If you can't log in, you got an issue, reach out to me, because as the board administrator and as Max my backup, we can go in and get you reset on your passwords, if you forgot your OR number, any of that. But it's incumbent on you to stay on top of that, not me. So I would like just a clean report that comes out that says that you're upset. I don't see yours. That's so that's your state employee. That's on you. But it is, just because things change so much, gas pushes out, and they don't, it's state employees and all the 200 boards that are out there and all the members of those 200 boards, because you're state officials and you're supposed to know better. And when you signed you swore in, you basically said, I will abide by these things. And also remember, you're public officials. If you've ever got a question or concern, or you're worried that, you know, I'm reaching out in this capacity, should I? You've got 5 people you can bounce things off of. You can always bounce things off of. Before I do this, what's the public records? You know, am I speaking in an official capacity? And we will help you with that. But it's always best to go reach inward back to staff and also keep things within the board, but also remember that things are a matter of public record when you start those communications too. So we're also here to keep you out of a jam.
Could you give me an example of what you mean by those communications in the public records report? Like,
Uh-oh, Sage, got something to hide?
no, I'm just like, at
When
what
you-
point
there's
there's
a-
take off the board hat and now I'm, you know what I mean?
Well, you have communications with me related to emergency management. They're outside of the OHCB.
Okay.
If you step into the space, like if there's an email discussion related to something, that make sure that it's transparent, that it's going to the whole group. If you want to engage the group related to a topic, engage everybody unless you're on a separate committee. There are discussions that go between chair, vice chair, and staff sometimes, those go on. But if you're into a space, you're talking about something where a board can make a decision, you're talking about quorum space, go broad, because then we can say, here's this. It's the same thing as, you know, if you're gonna meet for coffee, how many are there? You can get to that minutia sometimes. So we're just there just to make sure that things are transparent, because the board's subject to audits, those internal looks, and like everybody else is. So just be cognizant of that. And when you're not sure, go look at state policy.
Jim, as our representative to the Hanford Advisory Board, I don't think you've done a whole lot lately. I should say the Hanford Advisory Board has done.
Welcome to
Sorry about that. But is there anything to report to the board?
Yeah, no, we really haven't, and clear back, we did an exercise, I don't know, Tom would know when, but midsummer, and it was a great exercise. We set up the whole year and everything we wanted to discuss and when we wanted to put our letters of advice in and these things, and I think there's 12 of them or something this year, which is pretty unprecedented, which is great, but of course, with the hiatus of the federal government, everything went out the window, and we had, our meetings have been canceled, our committee meetings have been canceled, so we are already behind the 8 ball. So, but I was just talking to Ryan on his way out, and he's trying to get the the committee meetings, you know, that Tom and I worked on, all rescheduled here in December. He hasn't heard back, but to kind of fast track things, because otherwise we're not gonna meet until sometime in January, and it will set the whole, our fiscal year. It's not the same as the, you know, the calendar year, but I couldn't tell you when it is exactly, but Max probably could.
October 1st to
I'm
September.
trying to expedite some of those things, or because you have to be on a perfect schedule to go through the process to do the letters of recommendation, right? And so we will be off for the whole year if we don't get things quickly back on track. But other than that, yeah, we've been laid off, as it were, for quite some time, but we should ramp up quickly now.
Are there any particular pieces of advice you guys are planning that we should be aware of, this board?
Tom, are you still on?
I am.
Did you hear that question?
So, right now, there are three pieces that are actively being worked. One of them is the cleanup priorities for fiscal 27, which tells DOE what they should be interested in budgeting for. That one has a couple drafts that need a little bit of work. Mia and I are on that issue manager team and are pretty active. There's another one just basically on communication strategies. A lot of documents that have been asked. We tried to put forward a piece of advice on ERDF, trying to use contaminated soil rather than clean soil, and DOE turned us down, said we were not allowed to issue that advice because it wasn't on the work plan, which is new. So really just trying to keep the board's head above water. The membership packets, which were supposed to start October 1st, have not been approved yet. So half the board is not on the board anymore. So interesting times.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next item on the agenda was date for winter meeting. When was it last year? Does anyone?
Like third week in January, I think, and it's a virtual meeting too. It's not an in-person meeting.
Now, it's a little closer to time right now than so. We have held meetings in the past, typically in January, as a winter meeting, although from now to then it's a little quick. But February starts the legislative session. We wouldn't get any attendance, and I don't think it would be fair for our elected official members to have a meeting in February since they couldn't be able to come. So I think we either have to think about either a meeting in January, which, you know, we could come up with content and talk about some things then, or it's back to March to allow for the elected officials' participation, which we could do that too. Any thoughts from the board? That's just kind of just.
March is good.
March.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I would be leaning toward March as well, because then we can have a meeting out in the June, July timeframe. And if you look at some of the things we've been talking about, you know, nothing much is going to happen.
We could always call it an emergency meeting too, if we really wanted to talk about something. You know, for example, if DOE holds true to its schedule and releases information or makes a decision at the end of the year about the tank waste, where to solidify the tank waste, we may want to get together and talk about what that means. But I think a March meeting, just to give us time to prep, have content, have things happen to talk about, might be wise for us to do. We have the evaluated exercise, the CGS is the,
Right, which Sage is also involved
so
in.
we don't do it that way.
We don't want to do it that, no. Come on, throw it up there.
Which week is that?
That's the last week.
So March 16th or 17th might be good ideas. If anybody has, just looking at the calendar here. The legislative session actually goes until the 9th of March. So the week after
So
might be a
16
good.
or 17.
17th, Tuesday? St. Patty's.
St. Patrick's Day.
Sure.
That's a good day for a meeting.
All right.
Corned beef
It's a
and hash.
lucky day.
We'll in person because it's in March, or we still doing
We'll
virtual?
do virtual.
Virtual.
We only budget for 2 in-person meetings a year.
Great.
Stephen, if you're still online, does that work for you?
I think so. What was that date again? Just to make sure.
17th.
Of
St.
March?
Patrick-
Yeah, I think that's just fine.
Okay,
I will send out a calendar reminder later and that way it'll be Teams, it'll be virtual and we'll develop agenda before then.
okay. Are there any other board business items anyone would like to discuss or surface? If not, then we would open the agenda for public comment. So anyone,
Dan Solitz is there.
Dan Solitz, please.
Well, thank you. It's been a long meeting, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. Got a concern about commingling the solid secondary waste with the glass in the IDF. If that Portland cement gets wet, it produces high pH water, and the high pH water plays havoc with the glass and could result in premature release of radionuclides. So if I'm telling a windmill, staff can just say, don't worry about it. If it's a real concern, then I'd like to have a discussion on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks,
Matt,
Dan.
do you know anything? I was under the impression that the only thing that goes into IDF are the canisters and nothing else.
No,
What's that, Dan?
I'm just going to say either Tom can go ahead or I can talk a little bit about it. But there's resin and charcoal and some other chemicals that are contaminated in the off-gas treating process, and those are supposed to be grouted and then put in with the glass at the IDF.
So my understanding is that most of that material, the 350, I want to say it's cubic yards, is supposed to be shipped off-site. That's what the secondary waste supplemental analysis was about. That material is also destined for Utah or Texas respectively.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Okay, any additional public comment? Okay, thank you, Dan. It's good to hear your voice. If there's nothing else.
Rick Tran and
Mason Murphy.
Thank you. We wanted to take the opportunity for Boothroyd and Rep Tran to introduce themselves. So Rep Tran, are you online with us?
We have, I
Was
believe.
there someone on the phone that wanted to make public comment?
Oh, yes, there is a phone number.
Okay. Please.
503.
Yes, please. If you could tell us who you are, who you're with, and then proceed.
Yes, I'm Dr. Joyce Holenstead, and I'm a Portland resident. And when you were introducing at the beginning of this meeting the things that had been accomplished, one of the things that I have not gotten an update on is what has happened to the FFTF? Is it cocooned? Is it removed? What has happened to it?
Thank you for the question. The fast flux test facility, right? That's the
Yes.
FSTF.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Tom, Cecilia, we put a comment letter about FFTF disposal to you.
Yeah, so the FFTF is shut down, but still there. There was a removal action to remove some of the sort of asbestos and get the building ready for demolition, but not actually doing any demolition yet. And there's still a couple milestones in place to figure out what to do with the sodium resistant residual sodium left there. But for right now, it's in stable monitoring, and they're going to be taking away some sort of asbestos to make it easier to inspect safely.
But there is no fuel on site. Fuel,
There's
is that
still
correct?
there's still contaminated sodium, but there's also uncontaminated sodium, which is sort of the high risk part of FFTF is sodium. If it gets in contact with air or water, it could have some bad effects.
And the contaminated sodium, has any of that been removed?
It's stored safely is the answer that we get. It has not
How
been
is it
treated
stored?
yet. I don't have that one. They eventually, I think the plan is to move it and use it as part of the high level waste vitrification process. But yeah, that one, there hasn't been any real significant change on FFTF for the past 10 or so years.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you answering my question. I am curious about how the contaminated sodium is stored, how the fuel is stored, etc.
Okay, I think we will plan to
Maybe
raise
they
that.
could mention at the
Yeah,
next
we will
meeting.
raise that question with DOE at a future meeting.
Okay. And would you repeat again the date of the next public meeting? I think you said it was January,
March 17th.
March 17th. Okay. Thank you very much.
What's your name again, please?
Yes, I'm Dr. Joyce Follingstead.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you for your interest. Jim?
Yeah, going back to the priorities that have or what they want advice on, and Tom and I had this discussion, is I will get that out to you guys, intended to do that because, you know, I'm not there representing myself, I'm there representing your voice. So I will get those pieces of advice that they want, and we can get it to you guys, and you can get it out to the bottom.
Thank you. That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any additional public comment? Okay, if not, this meeting is adjourned.
David.
Oh, sorry, I take that back. David, please.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I forgot too. Yeah, I was getting ready to
No,
go.
I'm sorry, the chow line is calling.
So I'll make this quick. I appreciate being part of this board. It is an honor to be on this board, be selected for it. Just a little bit about me. I started working at Hanford when it was a production site. I started in the eighties, N reactor was still running. Canning facilities are still running. So I started working in tank farms. I do design work. I design piping systems mostly. So started in tank farms. I worked out at K Basins when that started in 97. We were told in 97 that we would be done in 99. So we just missed that date. It was so close, so close.
They didn't say 2090.
Yeah, it was like, some of the things I've done over the years, I can't remember if it was Ray or Matt mentioned the jumper connections made in tank farms. I used to design jumpers and the remote piping things that we use in tank farms for routings. Designed some for B plant and Purex. I've been in every tank farm, I think, except B complex. I think I might have been it, but it's been a long time. I did work for West Valley. We mentioned West Valley. I designed some of the things in the in-cell for West Valley. I moved to Las Vegas in 2002 and worked at Yucca Mountain until that shut down. And boy, it would be really nice to have that now sometimes. Did work at INL. They had a big, it was like the size of a garage. And they put their barrels in it to go to whip and they'd x-ray them. And I worked on that x-ray system. It was made in the 80s. I had to go out and find all the parts. And this was like in 2000. So I'm familiar with what INL worked there. West of that project, I designed most of the piping and systems that are anything outside the cell. I designed that. I spent a summer counting barrels at the Central Waste Complex. The barrels are going to go to WIP and then find out, oh, some of those are leaking. I was like, that's wasn't the best news I've heard today. But you know, so I'd probably standing next to a lot of those. But yes, but it was hot. It was summertime in Eastern Washington counting barrels. It was not like the best thing I've ever done. And now, after about the last 10 years, I've supported soil and groundwater. So what Sarah's doing, I think, is like an amazing, incredible. I can't put my head around how big that job is. And in the black pipes they talked about running all over the site. Yeah, I've designed that. We put water out from way over there. Like we are taking water from east area over by A complex and C farm, and sending it to 2 West to clean it up and put it back. So I think one of them, and I don't know if we plan to put any more wells around the tank farm areas or not. I don't know, that's above my pay grade, but, and you were in the 2 West Pump and Treat last visit. I did a lot of stuff in both of those, the RAD building and the bio building. I've done a lot of design work there. So I am working until April or May is when I'm gonna retire, or it might be Monday. I don't know.
Find out you're here.
Yeah, but I work for Amentum. I work for CPC Co's parent company, and I'm one of the few people that work remote.
And you're going to Richland after this, right?
Tomorrow I have a meeting with somebody who wants me to do work for him. But
You
anyway,
live over here now?
I live in King City.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I am an Oregon resident, applied to the board, and it took a while, but I finally got on it. And if you have any questions about groundwater, just email me or call or anything else I can help with Hanford, how things work. More than happy to help.
We're glad to have you here.
Thank you. I
Welcome
appreciate it.
aboard.
Thank you. I just hope I can contribute because, but thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, so.
Thank you.
Okay,
Now
now,
we.
are we ready? Sure.
All right, this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
I think it's stop recording.
All right, good to see everybody. See you next time.